Have you ever noticed how your mind can turn a simple moment into a storm? How a single thought, a single comment, a single expression from someone else can expand into an entire universe of possibilities, fears, predictions, and regrets? Maybe you know this all too well. Lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling, replaying conversation that lasted only 30 seconds, dissecting each word, each pause, each breath, wondering if you said something wrong, or if they heard you differently than you intended. Or maybe it's the decisions that haunt you, the ones you haven't even made yet, the future conversation you rehearse 100 times, the outcome you pre-worry into existence, the moment you haven't lived yet, but somehow you've already lived it through 1,000 mental simulations. It's strange, isn't it? How the mind, this beautiful instrument designed for clarity and insight, can become a labyrinth where thoughts chase each other endlessly, like shadows on the walls of a room you can't leave. And if you've ever wondered why you overthink, why you analyze, replay, predict, catastrophize, you're not alone. Overthinking is one of the most human tendencies there is. It's not a flaw, not a weakness, not a defect in your personality. It's a response. A response shaped by your history, your fears, your childhood, your nervous system, your longing to control what you never truly could. Sometimes, when the world feels uncertain, your mind tries to create safety by imagining every possible outcome. It believes that if you can think enough, prepare enough, worry enough, maybe you can protect yourself from disappointment, embarrassment, or heartbreak. And so the thoughts spiral, expanding from a single spark into a wildfire of what ifs. Overthinking often begins with a wound, sometimes small, sometimes deep, but always tender. Maybe when you were younger, mistakes weren't forgiven easily. Maybe you had to think before every word you spoke because you were afraid of being misunderstood or punished. Maybe you grew up in a home where unpredictability ruled the air, and you learned to scan the environment constantly, anticipating moods, reactions, dangers. Maybe you were a child who internalized the idea that you must never be wrong, never upset anyone, never be out of control. And so you learned to live in your head, constantly predicting, constantly preparing, constantly bracing for emotional impact. That early vigilance becomes the adult overthinking we suffer today. But psychology gives this phenomenon a clearer name: hypervigilance. The brain, shaped by past experiences, becomes too sensitive, too alert, too ready to protect. You're not overthinking because you're weak. You're overthinking because your mind is trying to keep you safe. The human brain is wired for survival long before it is wired for peace. And for some people, survival meant noticing every shift in tone, every movement, every possibility. Overthinking is just vigilance turned inward. And then there's perfectionism, that quiet tyrant that whispers that nothing you do is ever enough. You may not even realize how deeply perfectionism sits inside you, like a hidden root that shapes every thought. If you believe you must always get it right, if you fear being judged, if you think your value depends on being flawless, your mind naturally loops through every detail, every angle, every scenario, searching for the perfectly safe path. You run mental rehearsals not because you want to, but because you feel you must. And so you overthink every message you send, every choice you make, every step you take, because you're terrified of the consequences of imperfection. The irony is that overthinking is itself imperfect, messy, stressful, and yet it tries to create a false sense of control. But control, as psychology reminds us, is the illusion that fuels the fire. When something feels uncertain, your mind tries to control it by thinking harder. If you can predict, you tell yourself, you will be prepared. If you can prepare, you won't be hurt. But life, with all its unpredictability, refuses to be controlled. And this mismatch between the mind's desire for certainty and life's nature of unpredictability creates the endless storm of thoughts. You think and think and think again, trying to anchor yourself in a world that will always move beneath your feet. Overthinking is also deeply connected to self-worth. People who trust themselves don't ruminate endlessly. People who believe in their choices don't replay them 1,000 times. People who know they can handle whatever comes don't fear the future so much. But when your self-worth has been chipped away by criticism, by emotional inconsistency, by rejection, by traumatic moments, your mind becomes a courtroom where every decision is tried, judged, and often sentenced. You second guess because you've learned not to trust yourself. You replay because you fear that you always get things wrong. You rehearse because you've been conditioned to believe that being unprepared makes you unworthy. The constant mental noise isn't stupidity or irrationality. It's a reflection of a self that has not yet learned its own strength. And yet, the mind can turn against itself in another way too, through loneliness. Overthinking grows in emptiness, when you don't have a safe person to talk to, when you don't have a place to unload your thoughts, when you've learned to keep everything inside, your mind becomes the only place where your fears can speak. So they speak loudly, they swirl, they echo, they multiply. In truth, overthinking is often the mind's attempt to have a conversation that your life never allowed you to have, out loud. But consider this for a moment. What if overthinking isn't just fear, but longing? Longing for answers, longing for reassurance, longing for understanding, longing for stability, longing for love, longing for a sense that you matter, that you belong, that things will be okay. The mind loops because the heart aches. It's that simple and that complicated. There's also the psychological truth that the brain is biased toward negativity. We are biologically wired to notice threats more than safety, criticism more than praise, danger more than calm. This is called the negativity bias, and it explains why your mind remembers the one thing you did wrong instead of the 100 you did right. Why you replay the embarrassing moment instead of the proud moment. Why you fear the worst instead of expecting the best. In an ancient world, this bias kept our ancestors alive. In the modern world, it keeps us anxious. Overthinking is the modern mind trying to survive in an emotional wilderness. But what makes overthinking so emotionally exhausting is not just the thoughts themselves, but the meanings we attach to them. When you think, why did they look at me like that? You're not just asking about the moment, you're questioning your worth. When you think, did I say the wrong thing? You're not just recalling a conversation. You're wondering whether you are enough. When you think, what if I fail? You're not just imagining a future event, you're confronting your deepest insecurities. Overthinking isn't about the thoughts, it's about what those thoughts say about you. And the quieter you speak to yourself, the louder overthinking becomes. Sometimes overthinking grows out of emotional abandonment. Not always physical, but emotional. If you grew up needing to interpret people's moods because nobody explained them to you, if you had to guess whether someone was upset, if you felt responsible for other people's emotions, then your brain learned to over-monitor. Your mind had to become a radar for emotional danger. And as an adult, that radar doesn't turn off just because you're safe. It keeps scanning, and every scan becomes a thought, a worry, a prediction, a fear. But here's something you may not have considered. Overthinking is also your brain's attempt to rewrite the past. When you replay a conversation, you're not trying to remember it, you're trying to fix it. When you think about what you should have said, you're trying to heal a moment you can no longer touch. When you imagine different outcomes, You're trying to create the version of reality where you felt safe, confident, loved. Overthinking is often the mind grieving the moment it wishes it could redo. And yet, despite how overwhelming it feels, overthinking also reveals something beautiful about you. You care. You care deeply. You think deeply. You feel deeply. You want to get things right. You want to protect yourself and the people you love. You want life to make sense. You want to be understood. Overthinking is painful, yes, but the pain comes from sincerity, from sensitivity, from being someone who carries emotion not lightly but fully. Still, the cost is real. Overthinking steals your sleep. It steals your peace. It steals your ability to be present. When your mind is always in the past or the future, you lose the ability to feel the moment you're actually living. And this is where the psychological trap deepens. The more you think, the less you live. The less you live, the more there is to think about. It becomes a cycle that feeds itself. But here's a quiet truth the mind often forgets. Thoughts are not predictions. Thoughts are not warnings. Thoughts are not instructions. They are simply thoughts, echoes of old fears, reflections of past wounds, attempts to find safety where safety is not needed. The mind thinks, but you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them, the observer, the witness, the one who can choose which thoughts deserve attention and which can drift away like clouds. If you've ever wondered why you can't stop overthinking, the answer is simple. No one ever taught you how. No one taught you how to feel emotions safely. No one taught you how to sit with uncertainty. No one taught you how to trust yourself. No one taught you that discomfort is not danger. You were taught to achieve, to please, to perform, not to feel. And when you don't know how to feel, you think instead. But healing begins the moment you realize you don't have to solve everything in your mind. You don't have to predict every future moment. You don't have to replay every past mistake. You don't have to earn peace by thinking your way to it. You can simply step back, breathe, and say to yourself, this is just a thought. I don't have to follow it. And slowly, gently, the storm begins to quiet. Imagine your thoughts as waves on a shore. Some crash loudly, some ripple softly, but none of them stay. Thoughts come and go. Overthinking only happens when you chase the waves instead of letting them pass. The key is not to stop thinking. No one can do that. The key is to stop believing that every thought is a threat or a message or a prophecy. Some thoughts are just noise, and some thoughts are just fear wearing the mask of logic. Overthinking loses its power when you replace fear with compassion, when you speak to yourself the way you needed someone to speak to you when you were younger, when you say, it's okay not to know, it's okay to be uncertain, it's okay to be imperfect, you're doing the best you can. Because ultimately, the cure for overthinking isn't clarity, it's kindness. Not everything needs to be solved. Some things just need to be soothed. And so, if you ever find yourself lost in the maze of your mind, thinking too much, worrying too much, imagining the worst, remember this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing at life. You are a human being trying to survive a world that asks too much and comforts too little. Overthinking is a scar from battles you didn't choose, shaped by experiences you didn't deserve. But scars don't mean you're damaged. They mean you've healed before, and you can heal again. You don't need to silence your mind, you just need to soften it. You don't need to stop thinking. You just need to trust yourself enough to let go. You don't need to predict the future. You just need to live the present. And you don't need to fix everything. You just need to remind yourself, gently, that you are safe now. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to quiet the storm.